The Loyalty of Esau Common by H.G. Wells. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Krista Zaleski. The Loyalty of Esau Common. A fragment. The native land of Esau Common was Aurelia, the head and center of that great political system, the Aurelian Empire, and he was born near the capital, in the very suburbs, indeed, of Brumosa, the mightiest city in many respects that the world has ever seen. And rather indiscreetly, as one is apt to do in this matter, he was born a lower middle-class Aurelian, of no particular family, and less than no particular expectations of wealth or influence in life. He was born in a little room over a shop full of picture frames, and of lengths and samples of picture framing, and amidst a faint smell of glue, and his first cry, mingled with the uproar of a traction engine that was blundering along the paved suburban high street upon which the rattling sash windows of his birth-chamber gave. Moreover, his father was a man whose trade had made him a vehement critic and contemner of artists, an avid reader, and, if possible, a purchaser of all books, excepting only novels and works upon art that came in his way. And these two circumstances gave certain qualities with which Providence, inexplicably careless of his social positions, had endowed our Esau a rather unusual and possibly unnatural direction. The exceptional qualities that constituted Esau's endowment resembled each other, and most other exceptional qualities, in being finally of very doubtful value to him. In most other respects they differed. One was a gift of the mind, and the second was a gift of the character. The first gift was a certain uncommon quality of imagination and intelligence, as indisputable as it is indefinable. In the dialect of the old schoolmaster, who made a precarious living by pretending to teach the tradesmen's sons in that Brumosan suburb, he was quick at figures. He was also quick at drawing, though he found no other copy in the school save the schoolmaster. And, at an astonishingly early age, he grasped the fact that the practice of reading gave rewards incommensurably great. He was a great reader, said his mother, and it was remarked by the curate who prepared him, in spite of precociously shrewd theological objections, for his first communion in the official church of the Aurelian Empire, that he was a lad of unusual intelligence. Now, unusual intelligence alone in persons of the Aurelian middle class is apt to lead to tragedies. The great Aurelian Empire does not recognize the necessity of persons of unusual intelligence springing up in its lower middle class. It is an empire distinctly characterized by its eminent sense of order and decorum. It goes to inordinate costs to maintain a special class of superior persons, and for unusual intelligence to appear outside that class displays, to say the least of it, an uncivil disregard of wise and careful arrangements, somewhere. In most instances, unusual intelligence of such irregular origin is starved and ignored, or at most permitted to exert itself, under proper patronage, in the ineffectual field of the arts. But it chanced that the tenor of the frame dealer's discourse on art in general, and his best customers in particular, gave his son an early and quite incurable bias against the practice of art in any form, while the parental collection of books gave it an equally strong bent towards the graver and more spacious interests of public affairs. And this bent presently got a very definite direction to one particular public affair, the question of military methods and efficiency, by the outbreak of a small but humiliating war upon the outskirts of the Aurelian Empire, and a visit that Esau paid, just at that adolescent period when undying ambitions are begotten, to an uncle who was a butler near Blundershot, the great permanent camp of military exercises in Aurelia. Esau discovered that to think of war, to study war, to prepare and somewhere to play that mighty game, was the one supremely desirable thing in life. He might just as well have decided that his calling in life was to play cricket with the fixed stars, so far as any prospect of realizing his ambition went. In the army of the Aurelian Empire at that time there were two distinct and practically uninterchangeable sorts of soldier. There were officers and the privates. The Aurelian private soldier was almost invariably a man of the lowest class. If he was not, that was his misfortune, for he was treated as such on all occasions. Unlike the ordinary common citizen, he was supposed to be unable to read, and such scanty instruction as was given him in the art of war — there was a strong feeling in the army against privates who knew too much — was bawled at him by sergeant instructors of exceptional lung power. Under pressure from these instructors, he was compelled to pursue an ideal of soldierly smartness by cutting his hair very short, except a little lock on the brow, which he called his quiff, and greasing the roots. Popularly, he was called a swaddy, or a jimmy. Our jimmies, people would say affectionately in times of war, and bloomin' jimmies in times of peace. And his brightly conspicuous blue baize uniform was resented in all but the meanest drinking houses and places of public resort. The public was perpetually regaled with stories and anecdotes of the amours of Jimmy, with the nurse girl and the cook, and that women of this sort were accustomed to pay pence to Jimmy for his public company was one of the dearest legends of the great Aurelian public. The practical promotion open to Jimmy culminated in such a position as an embezzling mess clerk or as a sergeant instructor, from which altitude he might bawl even as he had been bawled at, and impose on fresh generations of Jimmies that mysterious ideal of soldierly smartness, the quiff. To become an officer was an accident too rare, too altogether dependent upon the remote opportunity coming to meet the rare gift, to enter into his ambitions. Clearly there was no way through enlistment as a private soldier by which Esau might dream of becoming anything more than raw material in the art of war. And the officers of the Aurelian army formed an equally inaccessible class. The general public of this great empire, in spite of its inordinate pride in its imperial ascendancy, was probably as mean-souled as any public has ever been. It would not even educate its own children, but cheerfully permitted them to be trained in the sectarian schools of various proletizing bodies, to keep down the rates, and instead of assiduously seeking through all its available resources for men of exceptional gifts and energy to shape and guide the military forces upon which its ascendancy finally depended, it acquiesced and indeed rejoiced in a system which amounted practically to the conversion of each of the few score undermanned regiments it maintained into a social club. Its officers were paid a mere honorarium, its subalterns received less money than if they had been tenth-rate clerks, and on the other hand, the officers' dining arrangements, their contributions to the regimental band and kursaal, and their hospitalities were conceived in a spirit of magnificent profusion. It was the boast, the glory of the Aurelian army, that an officer, even with a code of honor that condoned unpaid tradesmen's bills, could not live on his pay, and consequently that its officers were gentlemen, which in Aurelia meant richly living men. The center of regimental expenditure was the mess, and a regiment was more or less a crack regiment in just the proportion that its officers were expensive messers. This, of course, narrowed the choice of the Aurelian Empire in the matter of officers to the limited class of the rich, and even of these, the more adventurous and the more intellectual traveled or played the more exciting game of public affairs. For most of these officers, service in that army was not regarded as an arduous profession, but as a way of passing the time, and with the natural disinclination of prosperous people to risk brain pressure, it was regarded as a breach of good manners among them to talk shop. The Aurelians were very proud of the class of officers, at once showy, impressive, and inexpensive, that was obtained in this way, and it was believed as firmly that Jimmy would not serve under a man who was not a gentleman, as that he was tipped pennies by servant girls. And certainly only young men with a taste for bright blue baize and servants' girls' pennies, and acting as waiters in a class club, were very urgently tempted, in peaceful times at any rate, to enter the Aurelian army. Now, as Esau's father was a man of small means, Esau was no sort of gentleman at all, and the mere whisper of him becoming an officer in the army would have sent every friend and relation he possessed into inextinguishable laughter. They would have yelled with laughter at the idea of the profession of arms being a remunerative calling. It would have seemed to these singular people as funny as apprenticing a boy to a duke. So Esau, when his school days were over, became a clerk, and afterwards turned the fruits of his father's library to the business of journalism. And the Aurelian army did not visibly suffer in the slightest degree for the loss of that exceptional intelligence and imagination of his. The empire was at peace, and not a mess entertainment, but was the brighter for the absence of Esau's no doubt vulgar manners, his not very cheerful face, and the inglorious parsimony his presence would have entailed. But, as I said, Esau had not one exceptional gift, but two, and the second was that queer set of elements in the will that make a man dogged. He could see obstacles, at times he saw them big, but he could not see impossibilities. He was interested in the art of war. He wanted to play that game. It was not the outward show of soldiering captivated him, not the band and the uniform, not the effect of the mess glories on the feminine mind, nor the tramp, 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 all of which elements indeed seemed to him rather boring accessories, but the real thing. And because he could not be a professional soldier, he did not propose to bury his ambition out of sight and turn to other things. At any rate, there was nothing to prevent him studying, thinking about, dreaming about, and, if necessary, experimenting about this great actuality. So the reading of his early manhood was all of campaigns and theories. His holidays led him wherever military exercises were in progress, and for a time, under the immediate command of a wholesale draper and the remote control of a superseded lieutenant colonel of the regular army, he studied thirst and hunger, banked holiday crowds, and the thinnest sham of sham fighting as a volunteer. In time, Esau came to know quite a lot about war, to feel even that he could imagine what it might be when the next war came. At the very first he had come to this matter with a vague suspicion that the Aurelian army was not the supreme expression of human science and forethought. And as his knowledge grew, his suspicion expanded into a conviction that, partly by reason of the base parsimony of the Aurelian taxpayer and the dodgy incapacity of the statesman he favored, and partly by reason of the aggressive exclusiveness of the Aurelian wealthy, who would rather see a thing not done than have it done by a low-class fellow countryman, the Aurelian army was about as inefficient and inadequate a fighting machine as any empire in the world, except perhaps the Chinese, had ever tempted Providence by maintaining. It was undermanned, it was stupidly officered, its economy was controlled by civilian clerks who knew nothing of war and cared less, its drill was 50 years out of date, it was short of horses and devoid of transport, and he became more and more convinced that nothing but a miracle could save it from overwhelming disaster if it ever came into collision with either the army of Celteria or that of Barbarossa, Aurelia's great rivals in the world. Not, indeed, that either of these armies struck Esau as being exceptionally efficient or incapable of disaster, but they outclassed the Aurelian force quite hopelessly for all that. Now this realization distressed Esau very much. Aurelia was a splendid and spacious empire, with a glorious language and literature and a gallant history, even if it lacked gallant taxpayers. And Esau's pride in his race and nationality was, to begin with, an almost religious passion. And here, marring his pride and darkening his future for him, he perceived more and more clearly this flaw upon its glories. The thing kept him awake at night, and by day it distressed him to the pitch of perpetually wanting to do something, and never being able to get that something done in a satisfactory manner. He wrote letters to influential military people, who did not answer him or snubbed him pitilessly. He wrote letters to papers that made him seem a conceited and jealous detractor of happily placed officials. He wrote articles that he found it very hard to get printed, or that finally got themselves torn up again in a fit of unpatriotic pique. He tainted the little reputation he had made as a journalist by his attentions to this topic. His chief editor had to stipulate that when Esau wrote articles about this and that, he should not go dragging in the army grievance, and Cockshot, the humorous writer and talker, added, "Hello, Common, what's the Aurelian officer done now?" to his collection of daily jests. To which Esau usually answered, "Nothing." And when his patriotic ardor began to cool under the discovery of his absolute insignificance in the Aurelian scheme of things, another passion grew to replace it. And that was the exasperation of a man who believes in his own capacity and finds it universally denied, who finds his life slipping past him with no chance, with no shadow of an opportunity to prove him more than a windy contemptor of his superiors. By 33 he was a bitter man. His birthday fell on the great Aurelian bank holiday, when all over the country that volunteer force which was the Aurelian excuse for avoiding conscription did what were called maneuvers. By habit or accident, he found himself walking in the pine woods near Blundershot, the great Aurelian camp of arms. He had come upon a battalion in the shape of a straggling crowd, standing and firing a volley at 200 yards, preparatory to delivering a bayonet charge. And fleeing this horrid vision, he had come upon another massing, apparently to receive shrapnel at 700 yards. Finally his luck had brought him out upon the crest of a hill, from which the final march past was to be seen, dim and far away through the dense clouds of dust. He sat down upon a gate and watched the dark masses shape about and move, and every now and then the warm breeze brought the strains of their numerous excellent, and totally unnecessary, bands to his ears. There were over 20,000 men away there, infantry, in battalions that invariably fell short of their full strength. There were a squadron or so of cavalry, half a battery, a machine-gun section or so, and 29 men with bicycles. The entire force had no means of supply nor transport whatever. It was fed by a wholesale grocery firm that supplied its own carts, and whatever survivors a month of campaigning might leave of it were bound by every arrangement to be bootless and in rags, unless the enemy supplied them in the prisoners' enclosure. Esau's emotions took form at last in words. He misapplied his condemnation. "You fools," he said, addressing the collected masses. A voice answered him, a voice with a faintly foreign accent. "Peace advocate, I presume?" Esau turned and discovered a grey golf cap, a bronzed nose, and a red moustache. The golf cap, lifted, disclosed a pair of keen grey eyes. "Not a bit of it," said Esau. "Well," said the stranger argumentatively. "They'd be about as much good in a fight," said Esau, "as a Hyde Park demonstration." "Looks pretty stocky stuff, some of it," said the stranger. Esau made no direct reply. "There's a point," he said, "where courage becomes lunacy. A man who seriously proposes to go into a campaign as a volunteer soldier under the Aurelian War Office is either sick of his life or an idiot." "Studied the question?" "A little," said Esau. "What's wrong?" He had opened the floodgates. "Everything," said Esau, and assumed a more comfortable position on his gate. "For example." The stranger struck Esau as a person of unparalleled intelligence. He did not simply listen. He punctuated Esau's remarks with brief intelligent sentences of appreciation. "In the first place," explained Esau, "this volunteer army has not 1/10 of the guns it ought to have. It has no cavalry, it has no transport, and no stores. In a country abounding in horses, there is no organization for registering and using the national stock of horse flesh for transport, and it wears unserviceable uniforms. It is indeed a mere costly and inefficient emergency apparatus for filling up infantry battalions in the regular army that ought never to need filling. Its drill is obsolete." "Drill!" cried Esau. "They haven't begun to drill. All they can do is march up and down in lines and files and masses and shoot at targets. Those crowds there couldn't fight. They're only organized for processions and a sort of deadly rioting in savage lands. We haven't such a thing as a fighting regiment in the world." The stranger sought explanations. Esau expanded. "The first thing a battalion should be taught to do," he said, "is surely to fight in a battle. There's 3 principal things in that section: to learn to advance, to learn to stick tight and tackle in advance, and what's hardest and most necessary to learn, to move back fighting. As for the last, they haven't dreamt it's possible. The others they play at odd times. But just imagine what a battalion might be that was trained, say as well as a second-rate football club, to play up and stiffen and come back and rally. Why not? It isn't done anywhere." "I know," said Esau, "but it might be. It's all the fighting they want to know, you know, now, and if they learn it at the price of marching ragged on parade, what does it matter? And the next thing they want to know, every man of them, and the whole lot collectively, is just how to keep their little stomachs in order and their feet clean and tidy over all sorts of ground. His voice thickened with indignation. "They shy our poor devils of Jimmies," he cried, "into wildernesses of mud, up icy mountains, into hot deserts. They send them where there is nothing but putrid water to drink, and with emergency rations for 3 days ahead, clamoring to be eaten or thrown away. And never till the war comes do they give them a ha'porth of training in judgment or self-restraint. You know the fighting in warfare is nothing to the other thing, the traveling. That's the principal thing an army does in war. It moves about. But until this army of ours is actually in a war, it never moves itself a bit. It squats in barracks while its officers give entertainments and play cricket and polo, and half the men in each skeleton battalion are trotting about doing housework and washing up and all that. But you know, if everyone connected with this army was not a cursed fool, it would burn its barracks and march." "Where?" "Everywhere. All around the Aurelian Empire, in carts, on horses, or bicycles. Bicycles for preference. This army should go, battalions full up, rationed, armed, guns and everything, ready to fight." "In bad weather?" "Always." "Rough on it?" "Not a bit of it. It's the barracks are hell for soldiers. It's the dread of barracks keeps decent men out of the army. It's the barracks that make 1 man in 12 desert. The suicides at Blundershot are proverbial. They'd learn soon enough how not to let marching be rough on them. They'd see the world. Think of the sort of recruits they'd get for a bicycle tour round the Empire, with the off chance of fighting like football. Eh? They'd rope in something better than the lout who wants a blazing uniform, because of the girls, and has to be trained to sight his rifle by command. Just think of it. Beautiful regiments of brown, hard-seasoned men, with sound feet and sound insides, and all their stuff compactly with them, all of them knowing just what to do and just how to do it. Think of 'em going off white and young southeast and coming back hard and brown out of the west. Eh? Everlastingly." "But there must be a reason," began the red-haired man. "The reason is why the army is a social institution. Where'd the hunt be? Where'd the band be? How about the annual sports? No tennis for 'em, no cricket. Think, above all, of the wives of the titled officers." Esau expanded still further. He poured out the bitterness of his soul upon the strange ordering of things that made warfare the privilege of a particular class, the honor of soldiering a prerequisite of wealth. He admitted to this stranger the tragedy of his thwarted ambitions, with that freedom and intimacy that is sometimes so much more possible with strangers than it is even with our nearest friends. The red-haired man meditated upon him. "I, too, was born an Aurelian," he said at last. "But now?" "Life was too strictly defined in this country for my father. He did not like that state unto which it had pleased God to call him. And as sticking in that state is one of the fundamental articles of religion here at home, he went to Marantha, where they have a different creed. I was 16 years old then, and now I am a Maranthian." Esau looked at him with a new interest. For Marantha was a curiously situated country, sunken as it were between encircling arms of the Aurelian Empire, and threatened, it was openly said in both countries, by that process of expansion that seemed to be the Aurelian destiny. "But," he said, "don't you find that mixed your sympathies a little?" The Maranthian shook his head. "You don't feel yourself an Aurelian?" "Not a bit of it. Why should I?" "You can come back to the land where you spent all the impressionable years of your life and feel a foreigner?" The red-haired man looked at the dusty regiments away there and smiled up at Esau. "Don't you?" he asked. "Not a bit of it." "Where do you come in?" Esau looked interrogation. "They don't want you," said the red-haired man. "They will," said Esau, not very confidently. "Not a bit of it. They'd rather run their empire on the rocks and scuttle it than take help from a common man like you. What is it they call you?" He hesitated. "Bounder," suggested Esau. "Yes, that's the word. Bounder, outsider, poor man, not in the know." Esau stared at the distant march past. The red-haired man pursued his advantage. "Your empire," he said. "Did it bother to educate you?" "I did my learning in a national school." "There you are. The empire didn't want you. It handed you over to a society of pious people, and let 'em bring you up on charity and cheap teachers, to their own particular brand of piety, eh? It paid the very least it could for you. It only did that out of shame. It treated you as bad men treat their bastards. And afterwards?" Esau took a higher line. One gives to the empire. It's a duty, not a charity. They won't let you give. Keep out of it, you low-class brute. That's the empire's compliments to you. Let our officer boys of the proper class learn war, with your blood, and take your gifts to hell. Has it ever spoken differently to you?" Esau straddled his gate defensively. "The day will come," he said. "When you will die and be buried," said the red-haired man. "Since the Ironsides faded from the world, they've run no risks of men of your sort getting their hands on the machines." They came upon a pause. "Now, in Marantha," said the red-haired man, as though he spoke aloud, "a good soldier is a good soldier, wherever he was born." Esau did not answer. "Why should you not go to Marantha?" said the red-haired man, suddenly firing point-blank. "What does Marantha want with soldiers?" asked Esau. "It wants 'em, anyhow," said the red-haired man, "and it sees that it gets them." "Why?" "To prepare for war is to avoid it." "Not always." "It is the best. What possible country could Marantha fight?" The red-haired man shrugged his shoulders. "I am an Aurelian," said Esau. "The country does not admit it," said the red-haired man. "It lets me live here." "Like any other foreigner. You have no more to do with official Aurelia than with official Barbarossa or official Solteria. In the language of polite society, you don't exist. Now, in Marantha, you can exist just as much as you see proper." Esau shook his head, and the red-haired man, being a man of tact, presently passed to other things. And when they parted, he saw that they exchanged addresses, and Esau discovered that his interlocutor was Commandant Thomas Smith in that army of Marantha that never dreamt of fighting. And in the night Esau lay awake, turning over many spacious issues. At first the matter of his thoughts was intensely personal. Then it became political. And finally that specialist side of him got the upper hand. If ever that war came, if, after all, Marantha should fight, what possible chances could Marantha hope for? Suddenly he began to discover chances. In the morning he found his brain had got that problem forward to a very interesting stage. He devoured his breakfast and went out and bought as good a selection of maps of Marantha and portions of Marantha as Brumosa could afford him. And for some days his income as a journalist was in suspense as he studied this more congenial theme. "If, after all," he said, "they should try and make an army on these lines—" "By Jove!" cried Esau. "If they do that, they will beat us." He stood up, smitten to the heart by a vision. "If I had the making of this army," he cried, "it would be the finest war." When he had studied the country, he came to the army that Aurelia would have to fight in that country. But Aurelia possessed very little information about the army of Marantha. In the current number of a high-class review, however, Esau found a curious article on Marantha by a gentleman of position whose gist was this: that the Maranthians who had once been excellent sharpshooters could now no longer shoot. "Now I wonder what he and his relatives have been talking about," said Esau, and presently found himself hunting for further information. He discovered himself short of ready money. He was not the sort of man who keeps a big current account. So he drew on some reserves, declined some new journalistic work that offered, and set himself to pursue these unsuspected chances for the Maranthians that had dawned upon him in the middle of the night. He meditated upon Commandant Thomas Smith until that gentleman assumed something of a legendary quality in his memory. He chanced upon a paragraph in an evening paper, a not very conspicuous paragraph, referring to certain custom-house difficulties that had arisen with Marantha. "It's nothing," said Esau, after thrice reading the paragraph. "It's the sort of little hitch that might happen at any time." And the next day he had a visit from Commandant Thomas Smith. Common came through the folding doors between his bedroom and his living room to discover Commandant Smith standing near the window, pulling his red mustache and affecting to be unaware of the maps, sketches, and memoranda that littered the writing table. "Well?" said Commandant Smith. "Well?" said Esau. "Have you thought it over?" "As a problem, yes. A good deal." "As a personal problem?" "No, as a problem in the art of war." "That follows later. How about yourself?" "I'm an Aurelian," said Esau, and took down his tobacco and pipe. Commandant Smith sat down. "Cigarette?" said Esau, and handed tobacco and papers. Commandant Smith reopened his attack. He developed his theory of the Aurelian Empire with patient elaboration. "What I want to do," he said, is to clear away this delusion of yours that you belong to this empire, or that it belongs to you in any sort of way whatever. This empire is a plutocratic officialdom, supported by constituencies of fools. You don't come in anywhere. You're a lodger. I don't suppose you even vote." "I didn't last election," admitted Esau. "The Liberals put up a Jew, and the Conservatives put up a railway barrister, and I don't like either sort." Commandant Smith claimed the point by a gesture. "All the same," said Esau, "I'm an Aurelian." Commandant Smith restated his case. "I'm an Aurelian," said Esau. "Now look here," said Smith, and meditated for a moment with his eye on the heap of maps. "You persist in thinking you are an Aurelian. Very well. I will tell you now what everyone in Marantha believes, that your upper-class people here mean to pick a quarrel with us, wholly and solely to annex us, not with any friendly desire for unity, but simply that they may give us the benefit of that same tight system of exclusive class government, supported by a sham of party elections, that keeps everything here, schools, army, trade, in a state of such amazing efficiency. Well, we don't want those blessings. We've an old rascal as president, but anyhow we've got checks on him. On the whole, we don't do so badly. We think the Republican idea is something worth fighting for, and so we are getting ready to fight. I will tell you presently, in honest round figures, just what we count upon in men, material, and support. Of course, I shall give you no proofs. I shall just tell you. At present, they do not know that we are getting ready to fight. They do not know how we mean to fight. They know nothing of our resources and nothing of our temper. I don't believe that a single person in authority here has taken the trouble to mug these maps you have there for half an hour. They do not even know whom they will send against us." He paused. "Well?" said Esau. "Well," said Commandant Smith, "as you are so sure you are an Aurelian, you are one of those who are going to make war upon us. Get ready to do it. Hunt up the whole question, study the game till you know it like your hand. When you know it all, tell 'em. Offer to help them anyhow. Volunteer. I know for a fact they are going to fight us with 40,000 men." Esau turned on him quickly. "They are, I tell you. You know better. Tell 'em it can't be done. You can do anything with 40,000 men. Not jimmies in bright blue bays under amateurs who think they are professionals and short of horses and guns. But that's beside the mark. I give you leave to play the loyal Aurelian for a year. Get to work. Try and set your country to make use of what you know and what you can do. Give yourself. Don't ask for pay. Well? And when the year is up, if Aurelia will have nothing of you—" "I will serve another year," said Esau Common. Commandant Smith made a movement of impatience. He turned in his chair, and his voice went up to the note of irritation. "Confound it!" he shouted. "Don't you see that all this is not loyalty to Aurelia? It's simply a stupid self-devotion to this privileged governing class. Do you think we should object to union if we might come in fair and equal? Not a bit of it. But we know they don't mean to bring us in fair and equal. They mean to walk over us and treat us as they treat you. Ha ha, soldiers and gentlemen, bossing everything, muddling everything, spoiling our railways, spoiling our trade, snubbing all our promise, breaking our hearts, with a few moneylenders here and there to help 'em. That's part of their pretty ways. They will insult any good white man who isn't and doesn't want to be rich. They will truckle to any nigger who understands 20%. Your colonies in Colombia wouldn't stand it. You wouldn't stand it if you hadn't to do so. You know you'd barricade the streets of Bermosa tomorrow if you got your hands on the guns, and were sure the Barbarossa and the Saltarian people would stand off while you settled 'em. Only you're so thundering loyal and politic. You hate 'em, and so do we. We won't have 'em in Marantha. We will burn our towns first. We'll make our country a desert before we stand that. Better be shot than stifled. It's no war against Aurelia. It's a class war. Yes. And so was the revolt of your colonies in Colombia 100 years ago. They don't think it was now. They've jabbered the truth away. But the Colombia War of Independence was just a war against privilege, and so is this. And what a man of your class has to do on the side of privilege—" "I'm an Aurelian," said Esau. "You're a fool," said Smith, and drummed impatient fingers on the table. "Try that for a year, anyhow," said Smith. "I'll try it for 2, said Esau. "And then?" "Still Aurelian," said Common. Smith stood up. "Here is the address of an agent of mine," he said. Whenever you want your passage to Marantha, he'll give it you." He hesitated with the card in his hand. "Even if the war has begun. Of course, this address at any rate is confidential." "Of course," said Esau, "but I shan't come for all that." "My dear man, your country will be licked into a cocked hat, and then it will hump its back and say no thank you to a man of your sort. They'll make a ninth-class kingdom like Portugal of this empire before they let your sort in. They'll put a Jew or a Gilchrist nigger in before they let you in. You're the uttermost foreigner. You're a lower middle-class Aurelian. And then ugh!" And Smith turned himself about to find his hat. So soon as Smith had left him, Esau set his brains to work to demonstrate his loyalty to the country that was his own. He had a vision of a great series of articles on the national military inefficiency that he would write, articles of such capable and pitiless demonstration that it would be impossible for any sane person to deny the necessity of reform, and of reform in the direction that he would indicate. Variorum copies of these articles still exist in manuscript. 3 even reached type. They were sent to prominent magazines. They went as letters to politicians. The burthen of them all was that the army was bad, officers ignorant and untrained, men ignorant and untrained, arms defective, staff defective, ill reading for Aurelian eyes. It became evident Esau was a pro-Maranthian. One scheme Esau proposed for the brigading of volunteers was adopted without acknowledgment in a mangled form by the War Office, and a well-connected colonel patented one of Esau's suggestions for transport vehicles. The rest of his criticism and proposals were as the voice of one whose head is in a sack. And meanwhile the slow interchange of diplomacy broadened that little issue between Marantha and Aurelia. That little difficulty of the custom house added to itself other difficulties, and still other difficulties, until the Marantha question had clambered from obscure corner paragraphs in the newspapers to the possession of a daily column, and until that column had shifted from position to position until it was the dominant column every day. Here the fragment ends. The impossibility of keeping up the tone of careless geniality dawned upon the author. H.G. Wells. End of The Loyalty of Esau Common. This recording is in the public domain.